I scratched my head and thought, well, perhaps I can do it. If ever you've stood up in front of people, though, to do this sort of thing, you'll just know how nervous you get, how kind of absolute terrified you are that it's all going to go wrong. And many, many years ago, I was asked to talk to the OTC, the Officer Training Corps, in Nottingham. And I got there and I was pacing up and down, up and down, up and down, butterflies, stomach full of them. I thought, I'd better go for a pee. And I went for a pee, and some of you gentlemen will know what happens. You don't quite shake your peg, and you get a little bit of a dribble. And there I am, with a big wet stain on the front of my trousers, and I've got an audience of between 80 and 100 people waiting for me to stand on the stage. So I quickly ran to the car, and I turned the engine on, and I turned the heater on full, and I found a bit of clean cloth, and I'm in the front of the car, scrubbing away at this wet stain, and all of a sudden I looked up, and there's about half a dozen of them all gaping at me and God.
So from there on you wore black trousers.
You can imagine that by the time I got on the stage, I was in absolute bits. Right. Anyway, it went reasonably well.
There you go, you see.
Only 2 nodded off. Right then, I'm here to talk about the Royal Leicestershire Regiment, and of course I'm not going to talk about the whole of the history. And what I've done is I've just picked out 3, 4, 5, 6 of the kind of significant incidents in the history of the regiment. Now, before the regular army was formed in the latter part of the 17th century, of course the system was that if we went to war, the local squire got all the farmhands and they were armed and off they went. Although we'd always had, of course, some regular soldiers. There was Scotland and Ireland that forever needed policing, and we had territories abroad. But we had no proper standing army. And the Civil War, which ended in 1641, proved how effective, well-disciplined, well-trained troops could be with the Roundheads and the way that they conducted their war. The Continentals, of course, were already organised like that. They had proper standing orders. And so in about 1665, it was decided that we too should have a standing army. And the regiment started to be formed. And the Leicestershire Regiment, or the 17th, or Colonel Solomon's regiment, was formed in 1688. They didn't have numbers, they didn't have names, they were called after the commanding officer of the time. And a little bit later on, it was then decided that they would be given numbers, and they were given numbers in the order of precedence that they were formed. So the Colonel Solomon's regiment was the 17th Infantry Regiment to be formed, and so it took the name 17. And the word Leicestershire, of course, crept into the title a bit after that. So 1688, the regiment was formed. And the first, I ought to have pressed this button, hadn't I? Glasses? Anybody? On the bottom of the screen. And the very first job that they got was the following year. They were called to Northern Ireland, to London, or Derry as it was called then. The London was added a little bit later. What had happened is that the King of England, of course, was James II, who was a Catholic. And most of the people in England didn't want a Catholic king. So Queen Mary and William of Orange was invited. He came over and he was invited to take the throne. And King James II, the very man that had formed the regiment in 1688, then fled to France. He then went to Ireland and raised a Catholic army, which then marched on the Protestant areas of Inniskilling and Downpatrick and Derry. And so the regiment was ordered, along with the 11th Foot, which was later the Norfolks, to sail. They marched to Liverpool and sailed for Derry. Unfortunately, their orders said that they were to place themselves under the command of Colonel Lundy, who was the governor of Derry at the time, and that was probably a little bit of a weakness in their orders, because when they arrived in, is it the Foyle? The commanding officers and a few of the officers went ashore to meet Lundy. And Lundy had already convinced himself that the city would fall. Although the Catholic army, although it was a large army, half the army was only armed with sharpened sticks. But he did have King James with them, and he did have some French regular troops with him. And Lundy was absolutely convinced that there was no defending Derry, and he convinced the two officers of that, and against the wishes of the people of Derry, he dressed himself as a common man and they escaped. When they got back to England, the king, of course, was really displeased with the actions, and both the commanding officers were dismissed. In a later inquiry, Colonel Solomon, colonel of the 17th Regiment, was in fact, found not guilty of any crime. He was the junior commander and officer, so he was just doing as he was told. But in fact, he was never employed again. But of course, back in Derry, King James himself arrived at the city and asked them to give up the city. And of course, the cry was, which has gone down in history, no surrender. And it said that 13 apprentice boys, and that should have, oh dear, oh no. Always get let down by your technology, don't you? There we go. And it said that 13 apprentice boys closed the gates against King James's army. Now, of course, the gates had been closed for a few weeks, but it is so ingrained in the history of Northern Ireland that the apprentice boys closed the gates that it's pointless arguing against what actually happened that day. When we say apprentice boys, of course, we don't mean young lads. The practice in Northern Ireland was, or in Derry, in the Protestant areas, tradesmen, if they wanted an apprentice, rather than take a Catholic from outside of the city, they sent to Scotland for a good Protestant lad to become an apprentice. And so those kind of Scots immigrants were known as apprentices. The siege lasted 105 days. 8,000 of the city out of a population of 30,000 died, and eventually the Royal Navy relieved the city. And the very same ship that in fact took the 17th foot there was the ship that cut the boom that the rebels had stretched across the harbour. And to this day, of course, this is just taken just last year, just like we burn Guy Fawkes every year in Northern Ireland, in various places, they burn effigies of Lundy, the traitor that deserted the city of Derry. The 17th foot then had an opportunity to win back some of the glory, and in 1695, just a few years later, they took part in the siege of Namur, which is a large fort in Belgium. And the reason it's important is because this is the first battle honour that the British Army won, including the 17th foot. The French had taken the fort 3 years before, had fortified it. It was absolutely impregnable, but in fact the army surrounded it and Namur fell, and most of the regiment, or all the regiments that were there that day, got the very first battle honour. And for those that were at Glenparva, anybody? Yeah, we've got at least 1, 2, 3. There we go. In fact, there was a Namur platoon. So even all those years later, it was remembered. And so that's the reason I put in Namur, because it was. The next thing they took part in was in 1758. They went to Louisbourg. And Louisbourg, for anybody that knows their geography, is on the mouth of the St. Lawrence in Canada. And it was a great siege, something like 200 ships, 15,000 troops, all sorts of people went. And a massive undertaking. Even today, well, we wouldn't be able to do it today. We just wouldn't have the ships or the troops to do it. But really, what it was the turning point in the 7 Years' War. It was a pivotal battle that ended the French colonial rule in Canada. It led directly to the fall of Quebec, and the French, of course, then lost the whole of North America. They arrived off the coast of Louisbourg. Louisbourg, in fact, the keep of Louisbourg was the largest building in North America. So you can imagine it was a big, big fort. They also had defences, 8,000 French dug in along the beaches. The first week the weather was so bad that the attack couldn't take place, but the Navy contented themselves with just shelling the beach defences. And after a week, as the weather got better, the assault began. And a gentleman called Wolfe, who we'll have all heard of, in fact, with his brigade, outflanked the coast, the defences on the beach, and they all fled back to the fort, and so that allowed everybody else to get in a little bit closer, and within a week they'd landed the guns which now started the bombardment of Louisburg.